Hello and welcome, everyone. We're very pleased that you could join us today for this session. My name is Joni Brennan. I'm the president of the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada. We're a nonprofit association of about 120 members who are all working together to secure digital identity that's built around people for their benefits with security and privacy and helping our economy and our society to grow. So in my role as president, I have the absolute honor and pleasure of working with so many amazing, dedicated, passionate people who are working in this space. And so I have a few of them with me today. So we have Anne-Marie Hubert, who is Eastern Canada Managing Partner with Ernst & Young and president of the chapter of Human Technology Foundation, yes. We have Colleen Bolden, who is the director of Service New Brunswick, director of their Digital ID Lab and that program there. Thanks, Colleen. And we have Grimond Vallat, who is senior advisor and representative today for the Human Technology Foundation as well. So it's a fantastic group that we have. Now, I think I will start today with a few words about some work that we've been doing over the past 6 months or so. At DIAC, we believe that people need to be at the center, their benefits of digital identity. And we met with the Human Technology Foundation. And just by the name Human Technology Foundation, you get the image of this is an organization that is very focused on people and putting people at the center. So we thought it's a great opportunity to bring together the diversity from the Canadian ecosystem and the diversity from the Human Technology Foundation ecosystem to develop something that we didn't quite see in the space yet. And this is a white paper to discuss recommendations and principles for policy design that will help public and private sector to ensure that as they move forward in policy making, that people and their needs and their benefits are at the center of this process. So we certainly learned a lot working together over the last 6 months. We've got some key recommendations. Of course, people need to be at the center of the work. We want to make sure that digital identity is a tool to foster empowerment of people, bring more of that parity of how does data flow? How can I use data about me? So empowerment is important, and also making sure that we build trust through transparent governance. And so these are just some of the key factors, and maybe I will say that it's been a fantastic opportunity working together. So after our talk today, if you'd like to access the paper, English and French, you can find it on the front page of the DIAC website, diacc.ca. And you can also find it through the Human Technology Foundation website as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Grimond to share a couple of remarks about the Human Technology Foundation for us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johnny. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. So, yeah, a few words about the Human Technology Foundation. It's an international foundation which aims at putting the human at the very center of technology development. And it works basically as a research network counting thousands of members across the world who put their knowledges and their expertise all through projects, reports, studies. So it really works as a platform of discussion on one hand, but also as an expertise provider. We work on studies, we work on reports, and just to give a few examples of what we did recently, we worked on a new framework on how to share data for common good regarding to EU regulations. We also created impact assessment methods for investors in tech. And, well, regarding the digital ID issue, it really seemed natural and fundamental to work on the topic brought up by the Montreal chapter of the HTF and by DIAC, of course. The topic is the perfect illustration, I think, of how important it is to get the human at the center of technology development. We're basically talking about people's identity, the digitalization of people's identity, or the extension of people's identity in a digitalized world. So it's both needed, it's both very critical, and it needs to be framed, to be designed correctly from a human-centric point of view. So that's why we brought up that topic. And I mean, it's so important that it needs it needs to be designed in a proper way. Digital ID shall not be seen or designed, of course, as a liberty-limiting technology or tracking device. It's not that at all. It has to be something. It has to be a tool, as you said, Johnny, saving the interests of its users, empowering them, giving them control on their data, basically, and even allowing them to share that data. Because, as INCYBER said this morning, once you know that what you value is well protected, then you can start really valuing it by sharing it, actually. And I think that's why we're here. And just before going deeper into our discussion, I would like to enhance two things. Is that, first, interoperability and international consensus on technical standards is paramount. Without it, we won't have a digital ID that can be useful, that can be trustful. So policymakers, we at the FIC, should really work on that, reaching technological standards. And the other thing is adoption. We talked about it this morning too, but adoption is crucial, and you can't imagine the adoption of such thing as digital ID if it's not understandable, if it's not easy to use. And that's why our white paper insists so much on inclusiveness. Digital ID has to be easy to use, easily available for everyone, free also to use for citizens. And I think that will create the proper environment for digital ID to express its full potential, which is incredible. And maybe Anne-Marie, as you as the president of the HTF here in Montreal, you can explain us how you brought up that topic for us to work on.
Merci, Grimaud. Thank you. Pleasure to be here. So I chair the Canadian chapter of Human Technology Foundation. It's a great pleasure. I used to chair the Public Policy Forum in Canada. We all want to make a difference every day. We want our work to drive value, yes, for investors, but more importantly, you'll drive value for investors if you drive value for customers and if they trust what you do. There's no other way around. We want to wake up in the morning and see that we drive value for society. At the PPF, we did a fantastic job, but it was darn hard to get consensus between the provinces, to get everyone to agree, federal, provincial, and move the policy agenda. And when I was approached to create a chapter of Human Technology Foundation Canada, I thought, here's the opportunity. They think like us, heavy focus in Europe, committed to put the citizen first, drive value for customers, for citizens in a way that's human-centric, that respects the values and the principles that we should have. So if we bring the best of Canada and Europe and other countries together, from the research community, from organizations like DIAC, we can probably advance the policy agenda. And we all know, if you're in business, you know the large corporations having multiple sets of standards, it's a nightmare. The patchwork of standards costs a fortune, makes it very hard to drive consistent adoption, so it's hard to be compliant, it's costly. So that was joining the HTF was an opportunity to do that. We pick a few topics, and this one was really as a result of the fact I'm at EY, so we have teams that want to drive value for our clients. There were projects across the country, BC, Saskatchewan, Federal, Atlantic, Quebec on digital identity. Digital and data is new. Can we do it right and have one set of regulations that makes sense so we can drive value with it and we can build trust together and make it easier to do it right? So I felt, okay, well, if it's new regulation with AI and all this, we have a chance to do it right. We have a chance to help our policymaker make public policy that will enable all of us in our day-to-day lives to drive greater value for citizens and customers. So called Eric, the global chair, and said, Eric, would you help us on this one? Would you bring the best of Europe? We'll bring the best of Canada. Called Joni, and she says, yes, quite interested. And here we are.
Joni called me.
Yeah, called and a number of others. Yeah, and here we are proposing a policy framework that hopefully will guide our actions together and help us drive greater value for each other going forward.
So it's a real exciting opportunity, and as you can see, it's really a project that takes a village to move forward. It takes many different types of personalities, and if you have the opportunity to read the paper, you'll see that one of the things we've called out is that one size fits all doesn't fit at all, because we have so many different types of personalities and different types of thoughts as how we go forward. I liked what you shared about how this paper is informative in the policy and regulatory scheme. We at the DIAC have also developed for Canada what we call a Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. This is about defining a duty of care. So what would I expect when I interact with a service, both as a person, as a business? And really we see that there is a gap in legislation to clearly define empowerment, accountability. And so these works that we're collectively doing, I think we really believe that they will be tools to help us to close more gaps and to help us to move forward. Now, Colleen said that I called her, which I often do. And so looking at Canada, sometimes we think about ourselves as a mini European Union. We have a small number of states, provinces, and territories. And each of them have their own priorities and their own resources and their own ways of working forward to solve problems. So Colleen in New Brunswick is maybe a smaller province, but one that punches well above their weight in the ecosystem. So tell us a little bit about you, Colleen, and what makes you passionate for this, and why is this topic important for our audience?
Yeah, great question. It's almost like where to start. Digital identity is why we got together to inform policy. But if you think just about the curve of how fast technology is evolving, we all know that's not going to slow down anytime soon. And we also know that the ability for early adopters, who are right behind that immense curve, they're adapting and adopting very, very quickly. But our businesses and the rest of our citizenry really don't move that fast. Our tech companies move very, very fast. PayPal was over there. We talk about Google and Apple and all the first movers, Amazon, and the expectations of citizens on their governments is that we're just as fast and just as good. But governments move much slower for a whole lot of reasons. Primarily, our stakeholders are asking us to protect them, to set a very conscious, conservative approach forward. And so governments move slower, typically, than the rest of the stakeholders. We've just started calling our citizenry and our businesses customers. If you're in the private sector, you always think about your customer. Again, we always have to be responsive. We have to show value for money. All those themes that you're hearing from the business community. And the way we do that is we add value. So this report for me builds on a lot of the work we've been doing across the country. So I sat on the Identity Management Subcommittee, which is part of a joint council's work to further the technology, the cooperation, the collaboration between provinces and the federal government and the territories, of course. And to move the knowledge bar along. We have different levels of collaboration from ministerial, deputy, and experts down, service delivery experts. I also sit on Canary. Canary is how our profs at our various universities move globally. And again, emphasis on globally. It's no longer acceptable to be an island. We have to understand it's a global environment, it's a global economy, and whether we're talking about trade with our biggest partner in the US or trade with our friends in Europe, we have to be able to integrate into this new world or we'll get left behind. I'm also on the board of DIAC. It's my second term. They've been pushing the bar very hard on a lot of these public-private cooperation agreements, because it can't just work for government. It can't just work for one government. It has to work coast to coast in Canada. It has to work between countries for our trade agreements to move goods and for our businesses to be relevant. And so there's so much work to be done. We have the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. We have a set of guidelines. We have standards that are emerging, continuing to emerge. But we're missing the policy and the legislation. So if you think about business, legal, and technical, some of the legal work being done right now is a revision of the national privacy laws, and a lot of the themes in this paper are echoed in that. You also saw the privacy commissioners of the country come together just a couple of weeks ago and provide recommendations. Again, pretty similar themes emerging. You also have jurisdictions, and I know most of my colleagues are working on the next revision of their privacy laws. So again, the themes are emerging around citizen control, empowerment, protections, and we have to protect the vulnerable. It can't just work for the early adopters. It has to work for all citizens, and no one can be left behind if they choose to use to obtain services from governments in a digital format. So there's all kinds of new things from user design, all kinds of things. We're trying to move as fast as we can and upskill, and it's actually a phenomenal time to be in government as we try to embrace this change and also try to show value to our political masters, but also meet expectations of our citizenry and our businesses to be relevant in this new global economy.
Thanks so much for that, Colleen. And if my panel will go with me for a moment, I want to ask one question that's not in our prepared questions for today, but I think it'll be something that we can do fairly easily. Can you think about one use case? We know that how important use cases are. So can you think about maybe your favorite use case to make this story and the policy side of it real? I'll start. I immigrated to Canada, so I went through a very strong process with Immigration and Refugees Canada, who has all of my data and my information. However, while the technology may be present, there isn't a specific policy to say, this newcomer to Canada went through this process, now give them their data so that they can get enrolled in the province that they're going to move in. Technically, it's possible. From a policy perspective, the hook wasn't there yet. So this is something that we can definitely help newcomers to Canada to have a much easier and more efficient enrollment process as they get settled into where they're going to live. Grimond, do you have maybe a favorite case?
Lots of, but maybe to talk about a thing that can happen every day with IDs. And it's not because I go in bars every day, but anyway, my daughter will one day want to go into a bar, and she will be perhaps more than 21, and she will have to prove that she's more than 21 in the US, for example. And she'll have to show her ID for that, giving a lot of information to the people checking her ID, her name, first name, address, etc., etc. You don't have to give all of that to prove that you're more than 21 or more than 18. You don't have to disclose your name. You don't have to disclose even your real age.
Data minimization,
actually.
yeah.
Is data minimization. And I think that is one of the most fundamental principle around digital ID. Technology allows us to share information without revealing all the processed data to create that information. Technology allows us to share hardly, strictly, only what is needed when it's needed. And that's a major step forward into privacy, I think. And well, when I talk about digital ID, I think of that. I think of anonymity by default. I share what I want to share, only what I want to share. So bar was an excuse to talk about that. But anyway.
But I know through our conversations as well, one that came up as well was protecting children online, their ability to identify that they are a child and protect them from content. So, so many spaces. Anne-Marie, do you have a favorite thought?
I just want to bounce back
Yeah.
because my kids are older, and when I had that question on the IDs, didn't you need an ID to get there? So, Mom, we have everything we need in this house to prepare fake IDs.
So maybe we can stop that.
but honestly, to me, it's the managing crisis. We just went through COVID. COVID was the crisis of inequalities. How do you make sure people are fed if you don't know who they are, where they are? How do you make sure people have access to health care? Who doesn't have a computer to go to school? We didn't have that information to manage a crisis. It was easy. It was people who knew that people were not at school that told others by phone and whatever to be able to give the services to citizens. So how do we leverage, in countries like India, you'll see that in the report, 99% of population have digital identity, to provide service to everyone, to make sure no one is left behind, to make sure we reduce inequalities, and people get the benefits that they did. We saw that with United Way. I was co-chair of United Way campaign. Who doesn't have food? The elderly people are not allowed out of the house. Who doesn't have? And we had donors who wanted to donate, but the employers didn't have the phone number or the email address of their employees to ask. So we had to be very creative to get the money from the private sector to help the needy. We raised more than ever, but we didn't know how we were going to do it. And the level of effort required to be able to help people that don't have the same opportunities was immense.
Distribution, yeah. Colleen, do you have a favorite?
Oh boy, my head's spinning. First of all, to build on Guimond, he mentioned age verification and zero knowledge proof and not oversharing, because I was 23 till I turned 19, because it's 19 in New Brunswick. So, you know, I had my sister's IDs. So, but nobody knew that except the bartenders who knew my sisters. So how do we prevent, because governments have regulations in place to protect the public. So how do we protect, because that's part of our job, is to make sure that the right intended audience is obtaining services or alcohol or cannabis or whatever it is. It could be pornography access, and you're seeing more of those regulations around age verification in Europe than you are in Canada. It's just starting to hit, and there was a private member's bill that came out from a Quebec senator to the House last year. On the pandemic, and I used this example at Identity North last week, when government is called upon to deliver services fast, whether it's fires in BC or Fort McMurray or the California fires or Fiona that did well over $1 billion of damage across Atlantic Canada, people need their government to respond quickly. But we haven't given them the tools. We haven't built identity coast to coast where it's trusted. And so government will always have a foundational, fundamental role in this interaction with our citizenry and our businesses. And we are the issuers of foundational evidence. And in Canada, that is your birth certificate. And that jurisdictional responsibility is in the provinces and territories, unless you're an immigrant, and that is with IRCC, which is a federal government department. We also have pretty valuable databases. You want to get health services in this country, you must have a Medicare card also issued by your local jurisdiction. You want to drive a car, we issue your driver's license. So we will always have contextual, which is healthcare or driver's license, but we'll also be involved in citizenry supports in times of crisis. So there's been so many examples of that. The pandemic, absolutely. Governments are so proud of themselves across the country. We stepped up and issued vaccination credentials, showed that you booked appointments online, shifted and pivoted as fast as we could to try to build things quickly so you could go to a doctor online instead of in person. I mean, there's just so many examples where we learned a lot, tried to collaborate across the country, and helped to push the bar in this new digital world.
Great real world examples for making this real for all of us. And I'm sure you in the audience, I hope you can think of more as well. We'd like to hear your ideas as well. But I want to talk a little bit about, we have about 20 minutes left. So I do want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and some of the barriers and some strategies that we might see in the space. I know for us in DIAC, one thing that we see is there's a real lack of understanding about what digital ID is, and there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation. But we also see the challenges of Canada being very distributed, and how do we work across this very distributed ecosystem. So let's spend a little bit of time on the hard spots and maybe some of the panel's thoughts about how to work through some of those hard spots. So maybe we can start with you, Emery.
So the fact of the matter is that if you want to drive value with data, citizens or customers need to trust that you're doing the right thing. And because we don't have common policy framework, we have some that move very fast and do not engage the right stakeholders in their projects. We have some that start to move, but they don't have the right governance, so they will not do what's required to protect the citizens. So we have too many failures because we don't have the principles that we've put together to enable trust that would guide any project. So absent driving trust, and we saw that you see, most of you probably look at the Element Trust Parameter. We don't trust government, we don't trust business. Trust my employer, but really not the CEO, the people around me. I trust the research community, and they just released one last week on trust in tech, and it's going down like this because of social media. That's now included in the finish. So if you don't trust, are you going to use? And we talked about inclusion, fundamental principle. If you don't know how to use or you don't have the money, like you want to help the student at school, you want them to pass their exam, but they don't have a computer and they don't have internet. That's what we were facing with United Way. We distributed over 20,000 computers and we created internet access with the telecoms to be able to grab those children and help them out. But we first had to find them. So if you don't trust, no value creation, because no adoption. That's where it has to start, and it starts with sound governance and right principles.
Yeah, I love that. Trust is huge, huge. So thank you so much, Emery. Colleen, what do you see as barriers for us to overcome?
I think the biggest one is that we're still pretty siloed. People are busy. It's easier to just say, this is what I've been asked to do, focus alone, and move forward. Whether you're talking financial services industry, food traceability, it doesn't matter. Vaccination credentials, it's just simpler to go it alone. We all know that. The overhead for collaboration is there. But the output, if we get this right, is enormous. And it's a game changer for our country. So I think the biggest challenge is breaking down those silos, really, truly collaborating, and back that up with education, education, education.
Yeah. Agree fully there. Grumon, what do you see from your perspective on some of the biggest challenges and how to go through them? Don't worry about your headset. We can get
Broke
it.
something. Anyway, we talked about all those use cases just before, and you mentioned protection of the minors on the internet, which digital ID is one of the key of such protections. So it has an incredible potential. It's an incredible tool, but if it's not internationally operable, it's useless. if when I travel, my digital ID is useless. If I cannot bring with me my credentials, my data, it's useless. One of the biggest challenges, I think, is interoperability, is mutual recognition at international scale, actually. And just to give an example, I have to tell the story of what happened in Europe in 1999 when the EU issued a directive on digital signature. It massively failed because of a lack of consensus inside the EU. The directive has been transposed differently within the states. So there's been no mutual recognition of the digital signature systems in the EU. It failed completely. There's a new regulation now called ADAS, but it's been issued in 2014. So that's how important it is. We can build something, we can design something extremely useful, extremely inclusive, but it will be completely limited if it's only useful with one country, in one country, with one corporation, with one administration. So we really have to work on that on an international scale to be sure to make something useful. So I think that's one of the highest barriers.
So Guillemot, I would argue with you. Look at GDPR, European regulation. Any large business in the United States that wants to do business in Europe pretty much embraced something very similar to GDPR. So the size of the market in Europe, if you're driving the show, has an impact on larger businesses that choose to adopt the higher standard. And that kind of becomes a de facto norm eventually in their country. So keep on going in Europe. We badly need you with our neighbor.
Oh yeah, I agree with that. Still, we have to find a consensus, at least in Europe. The thing is that the new regulation on digital identity is being discussed right now. And once again, there are persistent differences between the states on such thing as the level of assurance, for example. So some countries invested already in digital ID systems, and they provide a substantial level of assurance, okay? And the draft actually requires a high level of assurance. So here we again, we're facing that same problem of consensus. It's being addressed by the presidency of the Commission, but well, yes, of course, if in EU we have something that works in all the EU, it will be great. I think it will perhaps spread out to the world, hopefully. But we still have to reach that consensus. And for the policymakers, it has to be a goal that is kept in mind all the time.
But Jenny, that's what you were talking about this morning. Like what's happening in Europe with protecting the youth?
Yeah.
No one got consensus of what we need to put in place, but we know that we don't want this to happen, so
That's
everyone is prevented from doing business. If maybe you want to say a few words on this one, because that's a form of consensus. We won't let this happen, so business is not allowed.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's a great use case. Yeah, we can all get behind this use case. Yeah.
Do you want me to say what about it?
Yes,
Yeah.
go please.
So there's this regulation in Europe called the Digital Services Act, and it's mainly about forbidding illegal content online. And one of the stipulations of this regulation states that you cannot use targeted ad towards minors. Okay. How do you know that an internet user is a minor?
Right.
You either have to dig more and more data to identify it.
It's a paradox.
Yeah, which is and it's stipulated in the regulation. You can't do that, of course. So the alternative, if you really want to enforce it, if it's not just something that's a joke, if you want to enforce it, is digital ID.
Yeah.
That's the only way. So the thing is that this regulation will apply to any company anywhere in the world which wants to use targeted ad in the EU. So yeah, it will have consequences on the global scale. Sure.
Yeah.
It's a great example, and I'll back to business, legal, and technical. Again, government regulators who are responsible to help prevent minors from accessing gambling, whatever, that they shouldn't be, that should be age-gated services. When we talk about the new world, we talk about zero proof knowledge or zero knowledge proof, and where you just put a checkbox. I'm over the age of 18. I can buy alcohol. You get a green checkbox. One of the gaps in legislation is that legal? Today,
Is that sufficient?
it's actually not. It's not baked into law. So what we do in the physical world is actually baked into law. What we do in the online world has to catch up in Canada. And that's one of the things that came out through the federal government work with digital nations and the EU and Canada around interoperability of our legislation and this new mobile-enabled world that we're all in. And so that's a great example.
And thinking about the power of words, so something that we called out within the white paper was that policymakers really need to think for policy to be future-proofed. Thinking about the outcomes that the policy is trying to achieve versus the prescription that is actually written within the policy. And an example there is within our financial ecosystem, the policy was calling for original proofs of identification. And the policymakers recently changed the word original proofs of identification to authentic proofs of identification, which suddenly opens up a whole new opportunity. Now it's not about bringing this piece of paper that is the original only piece of paper. It's about showing the authenticity of that who you are or that thing about you, your age or not. So words can be very powerful. And so working with policymakers to really think about what are the outcomes they want versus the prescription of how to achieve it.
Yeah, and I just want to build on that for one moment, because at the end of the day, it's about harmonization of the rules so that we can build innovative products very, very well in Canada and around the world, and then leverage that knowledge and build new markets and economic growth in our countries. Agreeing on the principles at the top end, moving that down to standards and then certifying those standards and actually doing audits against those standards. So companies, if you're not understanding some of these terms and themes that we're talking about, you can go to the DIAC website. There's a lot of work that's been done on all of this. You can see the modules under the Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. You can see the different levels of assurance under the infrastructure module, for instance, or the privacy module, and how that plays out in terms of what you are building. If you're a developer and you're not thinking in those terms, you're missing the boat.
Yeah, I think by that same thought, around the side of the use cases, Human Technology Foundation has done a paper on data altruism and all we can achieve by enabling the right policy design, the right ecosystem where people do feel the trust and the comfort and the informed consent to contribute their data for a public good, like cure medical issues, move forward in that way. I would strongly recommend you look for the data altruism paper from the Human Technology Foundation because it's fantastic work. I would like to ask the panel to think about. So you're in this audience and you've joined us. Thank you again for taking your time for this discussion. Or if you're watching this on demand as a video later, I'd like to ask the panel. I always like to ask you to think about, if I'm in the audience, what thing I want to learn more? What can I do? How can I get involved? Maybe that's tomorrow. Maybe that's in 1 week, 1 month, or 1 year. What should people be thinking who are listening today and are saying, yes, I see how important this topic is. I'd like to get involved. Maybe Anne-Marie.
Well, I assume that everyone is here. You have a job. You want to do your job, but doing a job, unless you feel it has a positive impact on people around you, it's not that fun. Sometimes, but if you feel that you're going to have an impact, create a better world, create a better lives for others, you have a lot more fun. So read the principles. If you only read that page, read the principles. And if you're doing work and you don't understand how the principles are applied in your environment, challenge. Challenge the team, challenge the leaders, challenge the project, challenge, do I really want to be involved with this when in a world where there's so much labor shortage? I can be involved in projects that do better for society. So I would suggest you read the report and all the links to the sites, but if you only read the principles and apply the principles, you will have a positive impact on this generation and future generations.
I love that so much. That's why I'm here, to help people. I really love this. Okay, Colleen.
I was just going to say, it's opportunities like this to share the learnings, but the same call to action, get involved. There's so many places to get involved, and it's continuous learning. You know, we all know that you might have grown up in one part of this domain, but you can't ignore all of the other facets. And there's so many resources online. Just reach out, get involved. All of this work is going on right across the country, and through the federal government as well, through extension to digital nations, with Homeland Security, you know, with the EU, with countries around the world. And it's every sector's going through this disruption.
Yeah, we're definitely not alone in this space. These are, even though we may have some different priorities or some different cultures or ways of looking at these issues, maybe some different governance that's underlying, we find that the commonalities, like protecting children, we all agree these are things that we need to do. Helping with people in need and healthcare, finding the next cure, we all agree on this. And so those principles are the underlining, and there are a lot of organizations working in the space. Human Technology Foundation, DIAC, we're two of them. We'd love to work with you. Grimom?
Yeah, all has been said, basically. But maybe, well, if you're a policymaker, if you're a technology developer, join us, join the fight. I mean, you can bring your expertise to us, to DIAC, to the Human Technology Foundation if you want, but also to other groups, other think tanks. But, well, digital ID, if we achieve building a trustful, useful digital ID, it will solve so much problem. So, not all of them, but almost on the internet, on the digital world. So yeah, just read things about it. If it frightens you, it's not frightening. It's not a tracking device. It's something that will empower people. It's something that will bring control back. So it's a good thing. It's an incredible tool. And if you wish to work with us on it, we'll be glad to welcome you, to talk with you about it. But yeah, I agree with all what's been said.
This is fantastic. So I think we're asking you to read the paper, review more of the ecosystem, see which organizations you want to work with. There are a couple here. Get involved with us. Now that we are so proud to have released the paper today, now our work begins on the next chapter, which is communicating the paper. So I'm going to add on, if you do read the paper, please share it with at least one other person who you think has interest, so pass it forward. And then our next step is working together on how to provide support and tools to make the principles very adoptable and easy for organizations to understand and then adopt, whether they're public sector entities or private sector entities. So even though we've published the paper today, the next chapter of engagement begins, and we'd love to call on you to be a part of that by reading, sharing, and collaborating with us in the next steps as we go forward. So I think that's our panel for today. And I want to thank again Anne-Marie, president of the Human Technology Foundation Montreal chapter, Colleen Bolden, director of the Digital ID Lab in that laboratory for New Brunswick Services, and Raymond, who's a senior advisor and representing Human Technology Foundation and his organization DTMV. Thank you.
And thank you to you, Joni.
Yeah.
It was a real pleasure to collaborate on this one.
We love collaborating. So please, we'll be here for a while. So please come speak with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts and your questions and how we can work together, because this is such an important file for all of us. Thank you for taking your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
And we hope to speak with you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks a lot.